Hi everyone, my name is Haven Asnep, and this week we are going to be looking at Hispanic culture reflected through art. And the particular artist I decided to focus on was Diego Rivera. And so I hope you enjoy learning about him and his background and enjoy this presentation, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. So the first question I really want to address is just who is Diego Rivera? Before we really look at how he influenced culture or even his art, we really need to understand the artist and what influenced him as a person and made him who he is. So he's known as a prominent Mexican painter, mostly for his murals and his frescoes. He was born December 8th, 1886 in Guanajuato, Mexico, to two kind of well-to-do parents. Fun fact, he was actually born a twin. However, his twin brother passed away at age 2. He was also Jewish, which I found interesting. And according to the Jewish Virtual Library, Rivera wrote in 1935, "My Jewishness is the dominant element in my life." However, Rivera wasn't raised Jewish. In the 15th or 16th century, his ancestry family was actually forced to switch to Catholicism, so he was raised Catholic. So it's interesting that he saw that as a dominant influence in his life, and he said that his Jewish ancestry gave him sympathy for the downtrodden masses, and he thought it informed his art. Another interesting thing is Rivera had 5 wives in his lifetime and had 1 son by his first marriage. However, his son died at a very young age. He also had an affair with a fellow artist at that time and had a daughter through her. And then shortly after this, he had 2 daughters by his second wife. Another interesting thing I found in my research is that in 1921, he married his 4th wife, Frida Kahlo, whom you may recognize. She's the female picture in the middle, at the bottom of the slide. And Frida is quite famous nowadays for her influence in the feminist movement, and she's kind of held up as a female model nowadays, so I thought you might recognize her. And she painted this portrait of Diego Rivera in 1937. Rivera is also known for his belief that there is no God. He said he was an atheist. And in his mural, Dreams of a Sunday in the Alameda, he depicted Ignacio Ramirez holding a sign which read, "God does not exist." So that was quite a controversial mural at the time. I wasn't able to fit it in this slide, but I'll show it in the next slide. So here's the painting I mentioned, a Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Almada. I don't know if it's Almada or Alameda Central Park. I wasn't able to fit the whole picture on the slide, and this picture really doesn't do it justice because this is a huge mural. Like in the museum, it covers like probably more than 10 feet of the wall, and it's life size. Like you stand in front of it and it's taller than you, and it's got more than 400 years of characters, different characters from Mexican history in the painting. You can actually see a portrait of Frida in the painting. There's just so much art in this just huge piece. It's got, indigenous family, a police officer, a man shooting into the face of someone being trampled by a horse. There's a sinister skeleton in there. Like, it's got all sorts of stuff going on, and it kind of gives you like a chaotic yet joyful feeling. It's got a thing of balloons at one point. So this is just one representation of a mural that Diego Rivera made. So to back up a couple years, Diego Rivera from a very young age was showing such promise in art that his mother didn't want to stunt this creativity and actually enrolled him in the National Academy of San Carlos in Mexico City at the age of 7. So just at 7 years old, he started studying art professionally. and he was really good from a very young age. The National Academy of San Carlos was very European-centered, however, and according to Rivera, this did stunt his Mexican heritage focus within his art quite a bit. Carlos was very focused on realism and kind of the European movements that were going on in the early 1800s. And you can kind of see this European influence in the painting called, or the sketch called Head of a Woman, which you can see on the left side of the slide. So at this very young age, his techniques were very, realist focused. The focus on realism promoted by the Academy was limiting to its students. The enforcement of traditional techniques often made students less receptive to Mexican art, as well as contemporary art movements occurring in Europe. And that is according to Winarski's peer-reviewed report on Diego Rivera. But later in his education, towards the end of his time in the National Academy of San Carlos, he was moved to two different kind of professors of art after Carlos, and they were Santiago and Rebel. And according to Winiarski, these two people primed him for Cubism, which is the primary art movement that Rivera is known for. And they both really helped him move towards a more abstract place within his art. And you can kind of see this movement. Wait, let me back up a minute. At the end of his time at the National Academy, his last year, he applied for his fellowship in Europe, and he ended up going to Spain. So we can actually see a huge way that his art shifted from realist to cubist when he did self-portraits. So he did a self-portrait in 1906, which is the top one, and then he did another self-portrait in 1907. And you can see just how much his portraits moved from realist to abstract just in that year's time, which I found really interesting. And so this really got him started for the Cubist movement that he was about to go into with Picasso. So now I need to explain what exactly is Cubism. Well, according to Rivera, Cubism is the most outstanding achievement in the plastic arts since the Renaissance. And if you know Renaissance art and how much that has influenced Western culture, it is quite the claim to say that that is the most outstanding achievement since then. And so according to Winiarski, Cubism incorporated reason, rigidity, and rules, and creativity that obscured the line between creativity and mathematics. Cubist artists used mathematical theories and processes in their works. So Cubism is a little more geometric, and of course there are different levels to that geometry within their art. You think of Pablo Picasso and how, rigid and geometric his works got. Well, Rivera was influenced by Picasso greatly, and he was going from Head of a Woman, which is very realist based, and going to this very geometric cubist view. So it was kind of fast in the life of Rivera. After 4 years in Spain, Rivera moved to France. The Cubist movement was just picking up pace there, influenced primarily by Picasso. And according to Winiarski, he wrote, "The rigid traditional artistic training that he received in Mexico primed Diego Rivera for Cubism. After moving to Paris, Rivera worked closely with Picasso, who taught him the logic and process behind Cubism. These two aspects of his artistic education allowed Rivera to fully understand the rationale behind Cubism. Rivera's Cubist work demonstrated a profound understanding of the style, but his deviation in subject matter, color, and tone established a connection between Rivera and Mexico, enabling him to construct a Mexican identity." So in other words, Rivera kind of reinvented Cubism and made it something different than what Pablo Picasso had it. So if you look at this picture on the left that Rivera did, this is a portrait he did of a friend, Retrato de Adolfo Bismarck, and I so apologize for butchering the pronunciation of that. But he used, somewhat gray colors, light tones. It wasn't a lot of color to that was influenced from his Mexican heritage. So he's still kind of leaning on the side of realist, but he's influencing all these, or putting in all these new styles that he hasn't used before. And then if you look on the other side of the slide on the right, this is Rivera's work, View of Toledo. So he's getting a little more geometric. His color is being influenced from Mexico. Like, it is really cool to watch the process and how much he's changed or is changing. All right, to wrap things up, I just wanted to go over why all of this is important and why Rivera's work is famous now and how it influenced culture at the time. So after he spent his time in France, finished his fellowship, was influenced by Picasso, he came back to Mexico in the 1920s. And I was reading Richardson's research paper on Rivera titled The Dilemmas of a Communist Artist. And he writes, Rivera's return to Mexico led to the first products of what became to be known as the Mexican mural renaissance. And as his works of the 1920s and 1930s proved, Rivera was the most talented and original representative of that movement. So in 1922, he was commissioned by the federal government to paint the walls of the National Preparatory Society. And then in 1923, he painted a series of frescoes in the Secretariat of Public Education. Then just 3 years later, he painted the walls of the National School of Agriculture at Chipingo. So you can just kind of see how quickly he's moving up the ladder with these murals. And all of these are commissioned by the federal government, which is huge. Another thing that was hugely influential with Rivera and how he influenced culture was his political leanings. And as I mentioned earlier, he was somewhat a controversial artist, which of course makes you more famous when you're controversial. You get more media coverage, you could say. He was a member of the Syndicate of Revolutionary Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers, founded in 1912. And he was one of the founders. Him and several other artists were members of this syndicate. And they came up with a magazine journal where they basically wrote up why you should support the Communist Party. He was hugely part of the Russian-Soviet Union controversy that was going on during World War I. He was a member of the Mexican Communist Party. He painted murals in the U.S. a couple times that were very controversial. He did a big thing with the Rockefellers at the time. So this is really the big way he influenced culture. And yeah, that kind of sums up my research on Rivera, why, he was so talented as an artist, why that went on to be so influential in culture. His political leanings were a huge, huge part of that. And that was reflected through his art. In several of his murals, he made political statements that were very controversial. I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.